Thank you.
Over the years, much of Leonardo's work has been lost, possibly deliberately destroyed. Experts will help our builders decipher the 100,000 drawings that still remain. The build teams will have just 3 months to complete these 2 projects. By bringing Leonardo's machines to life, we're uncovering a genius centuries ahead of his time. The first build project is a spectacular 80-foot-wide crossbow that fires massive cannonballs. It was designed by Da Vinci in 1485, but never built. It'll be the largest crossbow ever made. To construct it will be a mammoth engineering project, and the team have to do it in only 3 months. It'll be built in Wiltshire, England, at this specialist woodyard. In charge of the team of skilled carpenters is Bill Keir. He's already worried about the risks involved in the project.
We're putting a huge amount of force into that bow. We wind this thing back, we get it up to 6.5 tons, something fails catastrophically, and it just throws bits of wood and metal all over the place. So, not injuring people is of prime importance with this. The second prime importance is that it throws a large rock a long distance.
The project leader is Dave Hepworth, a structural engineer who specializes in building wooden bows.
I can say, you know, I've done some computer models. In theory, it should fire 300 yards. Fine, I can say that to you now. But it might not fire 300 yards because it depends how well we build it.
But before building can begin, someone has to turn Leonardo's sketch of the crossbow into working plans that 21st century craftsmen can understand. Ivan Williams is a design engineer with 20 years' experience of making ancient weapons. But the scale and complexity of this machine is giving him his biggest headache to date.
I've got a lot of worries about the drawings that are there. I think maybe that's why it wasn't built, because the artisans that knew him would say to him, look, Leo, you know, I know you're intrigued with this, and the guy's paying a lot of money, but really, you know, you'll screw yourself. If you make this, you'll make a prat of yourself, because it won't work very well.
To make sure the build teams only use technology available in the 15th century, we've called in Professor Paolo Galluzzi. Director of the Science Museum in Florence, Paolo is one of the world's foremost authorities on Renaissance science and technology, and an expert on Leonardo's machines. He knows the problems that lie ahead better than anyone.
This is the fantastic world of Leonardo. You have to look for hints and form a glimpse of the development of the idea in the Leonardo mind. He's a visionary. He's never simply accepting ordinary solutions. He wants to improve, and sometimes this is the weak point of his ideas. He wants to improve at any cost, even if he's raising or risking to enter the world of impossibility.
The entire crossbow team is meeting for the very first time at the woodyard in Wiltshire. And there are already disagreements.
Well, I might sound very negative with some of the things I'm about to say, but looking at all the problems that will occur, you know, if you list them down, there are many. The trigger mechanism. In my opinion, in this application, it won't work. Pressure on that nut would just rip straight out as it is. The whole thing was smashed. And there's no need for that, because there were trigger mechanisms at the time designed for this particular type of machine.
Well, as a watchdog of Leonardo's documents, I'm playing this role today. I would say that I would be pretty hesitant to abandon this trigger mechanism. As he says in a letter to the Duke of Milan offering his services, I will make machines out of the tradition. This is typical of Leonardo, is introducing innovation.
Right.
But there were trigger mechanisms around that he would have seen, and I'm sure the armors would have said to him, let's go for the one the Romans have used, proved dead simple, holds the string completely, you can't pop over the top.
Sure. And how do you interpret these design?
I'll try to copy it in a similar sort of way, but that's the weak point. That's where the bow will start to crack.
Paolo has reluctantly agreed to Ivan's modified trigger on grounds of safety, but the builders are pressing for 2 more changes. Because they're convinced Leonardo's bow will crack under tension, they want to slim it down to make it more flexible. Secondly, they insist the size of the entire crossbow is inefficient. Dave's computer model suggests that it will work just as well 30 foot shorter. Paolo accepts Renaissance builders may have made some adjustments. But are Dave and Ivan straying too far from Leonardo's design?
Paolo's really keen that we follow the original Leonardo design. But I think it's ridiculously huge. I mean, come on, 80 feet is silly. We've got to go for something more like 50 feet. I'm sure that is exactly how it would have worked in Leonardo's day. They would have gone along, they would have changed things as they'd made it, and that is exactly what we need to do. We need to make this a learning experience, not just follow this design, build it exactly as it is. Yeah, it was an experiment, that's what we're doing. We're doing an experiment. I think it's still in the spirit of the Leonardo project.
Team leader Dave Hepworth believes that at 50 feet, this machine will still be 5 times bigger than any crossbow ever built. Leonardo drew the giant crossbow in 1485 when he was 33 years old. It was designed for the most powerful warlord in Italy, Ludovico Sforza. Leonardo was his court engineer, one of the most prestigious jobs in the country. He'd come a long way from his humble beginnings. Leonardo was born in 1452 in the village of Vinci. He was the illegitimate son of a lawyer and a peasant girl. Because of his illegitimate status, the higher professions were closed to Leonardo. Instead, he got only the basic education reserved for artisans. He was left-handed and always wrote backwards, moving his hand from right to left across the page. Being illegitimate made Leonardo something of an outsider, and from an early age he sought solace in nature and spent many hours wandering the countryside alone. The natural world fascinated and inspired him. One thing in particular obsessed him more than anything else: flight. It was a dream Leonardo would pursue his whole life.
There is that very interesting story, which is one of the few personal things in his notebooks, about lying in his crib and a bird came down and touched his lips with its tail. What for Leonardo it meant was that he was predestined to think about flight. This is my destiny, he effectively says about this vision. So the bird has come from the air and touched him, as it were, with his magic.
Our second project is to make Leonardo's dream of flight come true. Steve Roberts and Martin Kimm have that job. They're world famous for recreating the milestone machines of aviation history. But their knowledge will be of little use when attempting to build a machine that predates flight by 400 years. Their task will be further complicated by the sheer volume of ideas Leonardo produced. For flight was something he returned to constantly and never stopped trying to understand. The glider team have literally hundreds of designs to sort through, from weird and wonderful man-powered flying machines to designs for gliders based on Leonardo's observations of birds and bats. In this huge archive of sketches, Steve and Martin notice one particular wing shape that Leonardo draws time and time again.
This is nice. The only trouble, if we go down that road, I think we're not going to be very stable.
No, it's, well, yeah, I mean, this is a better shape, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, but even that, I think you're still going to need a tail.
Do you think so?
For something that's so flat.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a tail here which is in his back drawing, really. As long as Leonardo's ideas and the concepts there, I think it would be fair to do.
So we're saying we'll go with this one. We can take the tail off of that.
Yeah, that's agreed then. So if we go for a tail, in that shape as well, really.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
That's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Steve and Martin plan to build this. It combines the tail from one Leonardo drawing with the most common wing shape among his designs. They're determined to stay faithful to this 500-year-old design, even though their many years of experience tell them it may not fly. The first step is to build a scale model.
I think we'll have to make another one go into production, I think.
The design relies entirely on the wooden frame and the spars for rigidity. There are no bracing cables for support.
It's going to be quite a spectacular joint, isn't it, for it to work?
The model has a 5-foot wingspan. The full-scale glider will be 30 foot. The first test looks promising, but they need to do more research before they can start work on the full-size design. The crossbow team have also built a model, and Ivan's trigger mechanism is working well. Now they need to find out more about the sort of materials Leonardo would have used during the Renaissance.
Flicking off.
Dave Hepworth and Steve Roberts are going to go to Florence to find out more about what types of wood Leonardo might have used to build his giant crossbow and his glider. When Leonardo came to Florence in 1469, he started out as an apprentice in the workshop of the painter and engineer Andrea Verrocchio. It was the best possible start for the young and talented Leonardo, because Florence was then the hub of an artistic and technological revolution, and home to some of the most talented artists and engineers in the world. These men inspired Leonardo. They were a new breed of craftsmen, unlike any before or since.
We have to be aware that an artist of the 15th century, of the Leonardo generation, is not any way similar to what we intend today for an artist. He's a worker, he's a producer, he's a builder at the same time. He's also an artist.
The great dome of Florence Cathedral is the crowning glory of this breed of artist-engineers. A feat of engineering genius, it was an inspiration for the young Leonardo when he first arrived in Florence. The dome was designed by the artist and engineer Filippo Brunelleschi. Brunelleschi broke with traditional methods and calculated mathematically how to construct the dome without using a wooden frame for internal support. But he had to invent cranes, hoists and scaffolding to put the pieces into place.
Amazing. Very tall steps.
Paolo has brought Dave and Steve to the monument they said could never be made.
Wow.
Leonardo's master, Verrocchio, won the commission to place a copper ball on top of the dome. And Leonardo got first-hand experience of the most innovative engineering project of the Renaissance.
Leonardo, we know, copied one by one all the Brunelleschi's machine being used by Verrocchio for arranging the big copper sphere and the cross atop.
So it's really a very important point in Leonardo's life to understand, isn't it? Because it's sort of the springboard to things that he did beyond that.
Point. Is the cradle, the beginning, is a lab for Leonardo. It's been a teaching lab to increase his learning and also to understand the great personality of Brunelleschi and how much you can do with transformation technology. Brunelleschi was his mentor. Brunelleschi was the man who gave to him the impulse to be a great engineer, copying, understanding what could be done better in his time and doing better than that.
Brunelleschi's great dome taught Leonardo that to be a great artist, you had to be a great engineer. And artist-engineers could turn impossible dreams into reality. But for Leonardo, there was an even greater inspiration: nature.
The genius of man may make many inventions, but it will never discover a more beautiful or more efficient way than nature's. Since in nature's inventions, nothing is wanting and nothing is superfluous.
The natural world features at the center of much of Leonardo's work. An early example is the Annunciation, painted by Leonardo at the age of only 21. It not only reveals his talent for representing nature, but also his urge to understand how nature works.
We know that Leonardo was accomplished as a naturalist, very scientific, very progressive, whereas the idea of the artist has been filled with mystique and mystery. And today we have these different fields of knowledge like science and engineering and art and painting. And back when Leonardo lived, they weren't all separated out. When Leonardo put his knowledge of the dynamics of water into the background of his paintings as an image, those were things that went hand in hand in a way that they don't today.
Nobody drew nature better than Leonardo. It moves, it stirs, it has an enormous sense of inner life, not just looking at the surface of nature, but he penetrates into what makes nature work, how its energies express itself in the air, in the movement of plants and the movement of water.
With his grasp of nature and the science he learned as an artist-engineer, Leonardo began to explore some very ambitious ideas. The most audacious of these was that he could build a mechanical bird, a machine that would make man fly.
The first flight of the great bird will fill the universe with wonder. All writing will be full of its fame, bringing eternal glory to the place of its origin.
He had seen into the future that we now live in.
You don't quite realise until you get out here just how important they can be to the success of the project as well.
Correct, yes, you're right.
Florence still has workshops practicing the technology of Leonardo's day. Fabio Rossi is a specialist in the restoration of Renaissance timbers. Paolo hopes he'll be able to give Steve and Dave some advice.
Yeah, we've got some specific questions about wood that we need answering. On one side of the bow we need a hardwood that can stand compression.
Legno capace di essere compresso.
Un legno compresso può essere l'olmo o il noce, tipo un legno è flessibile.
This is hard and flexible. This is walnut, but also the elm would be appropriate. Maybe the elm even better, but he would recommend elm or walnut.
And what about a flexible, stretchable wood for the outside of the bow? What would he use for that?
Yeah, and per la parte esterna delle braccia, perché le braccia sono spesse.
Dave believes he can make a more powerful bow by combining timbers that have different properties.
What would you recommend?
Pioppo sicuramente sarà flessibile, anche se leggero, però è
It's a much lighter, but it's very flexible.
For the crossbow, Fabio has suggested poplar as a wood Leonardo could have used. And poplar also has possibilities for Steve's glider.
Yes, this is certainly the lightest wood, and this was my first option. But I've explored this, and I like the weight, it's good, but I need something a bit stronger.
Qualcosa di leggero e flessibile per l'aliante potrebbe essere il pioppo.
Sì, ancora
He still insists that for a glider the poplar would be
the best option.
In his idea what they might have used, it's still the best option.
Although the builders are getting good practical advice, there is a problem. Leonardo's restless mind often drove him from one project to the next before he'd fleshed out the details in his drawings. He thought nothing of leaving his work unfinished if a fresh challenge caught his eye.
The story of Leonardo's Florentine work is rather puzzling in some ways. He has very prestigious commissions. One is for the Council Hall of Florence. Now, there cannot be a more prestigious one than that. And any career artist would know that getting that done on time would make his career, and he didn't finish it. And the other is this big altarpiece for a monastery outside Florence, again unfinished. And this suggests there is a problem.
It's hard for him to finish things for a number of reasons. First of all, he's just got this torrent of ideas always stirring around in his head, and they won't leave him alone. In a sense. There's too much inspiration. He was obviously brilliant, I mean, there's no question about that, and the mind was always working. But at some point, he needed to stop coming up with the big ideas and sit and work with the ordinary nuts and bolts, and he very seldom actually did that.
Back in England, the team are pressing on with the metalwork for the giant crossbow. Ivan Williams is at the forge where they're making the trigger mechanism and the huge brackets that will hold the whole crossbow together. It will need 10 tons of iron. With research and development now complete, the crossbow team have 9 weeks left to build their machine. And with the metalwork well underway, they have a head start over the glider team.
Look at the movement in that spar. Do you want to measure first?
Yeah, what, before we break it?
Yeah.
Steve and Martin have only just begun work on the full-size glider.
What is the about 1.5, 2G?
Yeah, it should represent more than it'll take, hopefully.
They're running tests to determine the strength of the traditional materials they're using. And they're simulating air pressure on the wing using sandbags.
Bar's twisting a bit.
A bit?
They've taken Fabio's advice and are using black poplar for the frame. Steve wanted to use spruce because it's lighter, but this wasn't known to Leonardo.
You happy with that?
Yep, it's a broken. We'll go with it.
Leather will bind the wing ribs, which are made of cane. The glider has to be as light as possible, and it is, weighing in at 70 pounds. But the linen for the wing will add another 10. To weatherproof the linen, they're trying out some Renaissance recipes.
Yeah, great. 2 seaweeds, shellac.
Yeah, starch.
Starch.
Not very good, that.
You don't, you're ruining it.
Yeah, I like the shellac because I think it's a bit of a varnish and they...
Yeah, I've got a problem with that, though.
What's your problem with that?
It's just the colour, really.
Now that they've started building, Steve and Martin have a better chance of assessing the flight potential of Leonardo's glider.
If it flies wonderfully, that would do just fine. You can look at it and say Leonardo would have flown years ago if he'd put his mind to it. And to be quite honest, I think he'd have run out of money trying before it worked, because I think he'd have crashed a lot of gliders before he got one that actually worked.
Realistically, if it produces lift, controllable, and leaves the ground and safely and comes back down to ground, I shall be absolutely elated. But I would love to see it go that extra bit, actually, just a bit more.
Yeah, Steve is clearly the more optimistic of the two of us, and he gets very excited and very carried away, and he tends to promise the earth. We'll see if we can deliver that.
Steve and Martin are concerned because Leonardo's wing lacks an aerofoil shape. The leading edge found on a modern aircraft wing divides airflow around it in a way that reduces pressure over the top surface. And this is what produces lift. Without this leading edge, Leonardo's wing may never get off the ground. It's the sheer scale of the build that's causing the crossbow team most of their problems. The carriage is 45 foot long and weighs a massive 10 tons. In Leonardo's drawing, the bow limbs are made from 2 huge lengths of wood with large blocks on the inside. But Dave has decided to make their bow limbs from thin layers of wood glued together, a technique known as lamination. Despite Fabio's advice, Dave has decided to use hickory instead of poplar. The hickory will go on the outside of the bow because it has good elastic properties. And the inside will be made from elm, which is good under compression. Dave thinks this combination will give the giant crossbow its best chance of working. The giant crossbow presents a puzzle to historians. Leonardo da Vinci was a pacifist, so why was he designing weapons of war?
We know him as an artist, but obviously he's also a scientist, and he's really interested in what is the latest technology. And for much of this period, the latest technology is weapons, methods of warfare that have never been used before, or perhaps adaptations of older methods of warfare that only he can see the potential of. He wants to push things to the boundary to see what can be achieved. And that can be an enigmatic smile, but it might also be the supergun of its period.
Why did Leonardo, a man famous for innovation, base his design on an ancient weapon, the crossbow, when the weapon of choice was the cannon? Leonardo knew that gunpowder was highly unstable and often killed the gunners. Cannon couldn't be relied upon for range or accuracy because of the problem of recoil. After each firing, it had to be repositioned and re-aimed. Could the giant crossbow actually have been a better weapon?
If the crossbow, the giant crossbow, can be made to work, it would have given a greater range than many of the cannon available at the time. It would have been smokeless, which meant you could observe the target. And of course it would be very, very efficient. And unlike cannon, which are shooting relatively in random, it's very likely it'll remain in the same position, so every shot that you fire will land in roughly the same sort of area. So in those terms, it really is a very, very much better weapon.
That's the expert's view. But what do the men actually building the crossbow think?
It's not so much what I think it'll do, is what it has to do to make us happy. If this thing doesn't throw 100 yards, we're not going to be happy. So we're looking for in excess of 100 yards. And we'd like in excess of 200 yards.
The main sort of concept is there, but you start to look at the smaller details and think, well, if I did that and did that, that would work then. So you not only look at it, you start to redesign it to make it work, because it wouldn't have worked as the drawing showed. But when you do see it, it's just a real eureka moment.
I can say, you know, I've done some computer models. In theory, it should fire 300 yards. Fine, I can say that to you now. But it might not fire 300 yards because it depends how well we build it. This thing is a huge construction, you know, the size of a house. And a lot of that knowledge on how wood works in a big dynamic structure is just not available. Well, it's no longer available. So as long as we can learn something from this, then I'll be happy with that. But I'd like the damn thing to fire as well.
With the giant crossbow, Leonardo was trying to build a precision weapon of war that would beat the cannon of the day. For inspiration, he looked to nature and the anatomy of the human body. The giant crossbow may not look as though it has anything in common with Leonardo's anatomical studies, but artist Sarah Simblett thinks otherwise. Sarah teaches anatomy to artists, and she uses Leonardo's remarkably accurate studies of muscles as teaching aids. Sarah is convinced there's evidence that Leonardo directly transferred the mechanics of the human body onto his designs for machines.
Now, it's particularly interesting in this series of drawings that we have here and in our study of the shoulder girdle to have a look at the way that he's treated the pectoralis major muscle. He's reduced the fibres of the muscle to cords. It's almost as if you're kind of creating a rigging on the bones. I mean, this is a technique he also carried straight across into his engineering, you know, when he's building crossbows and other great machines. Now, let's have a look at the muscle in detail. Okay. Leonardo is looking at the body as an artist and as an engineer. Other artists, they were really concerned with the surface structure. Leonardo takes it much further. He's interested in anatomy as a subject in itself. He's interested in the engineering of the body. So, for example, in his construction of the magnificent crossbow, we see a direct relationship between the tension of the wood and the tension of bone. It is covered almost quite literally with muscles and sinews that operate that invention.
It's human anatomy that inspired the giant crossbow. But a simple human error has put the project in jeopardy. Amazingly, Ivan's plans are in feet and inches, but some components have been ordered by the meter. Things don't fit, and tempers are starting to fray.
These big bolts here, just slightly too short, and the metal axle's taut. Slightly too long.
I think they're the right length. I think the axle is too small.
Well, OK, right, there's a bit of an issue there then.
I drew that originally at a foot, and I really think it needs a foot. Okay,
in terms of what?
Just the weight this time.
No way, that steel would have to bend for the wood to fracture. There's no way that's going to happen.
Okay. Now you were sort of worried about how this has come about, and I think that there are some preferences or whatever.
We're working to inches and millimetres.
Well, the slight, yeah. I mean, the problem is these drawings have been done at different times, and they haven't necessarily all
come together.
Right. The prod is the critical part of this. The bow limbs that stick out at the front.
Right.
The bits that are doing all the bending. If they don't store the energy well enough, or if they split, or the laminations fail, then it's not going to work.
If the glider team get their measurements wrong, it could be a matter of life or death.
It's just over 101 it is. Can't add up.
Steve and Martin are individually responsible for thousands of parts. And if those don't fit together exactly, the machine won't fly. And there's a crucial component on the way that they haven't yet got the measure of: the pilot. Finding someone who's prepared to risk their neck flying a 500-year-old glider that's never been flown before is no mean feat. Judy Leyden has agreed to take on the challenge. She's 3 times world hang gliding champion and holder of several world records. There are still 8 weeks before the glider will be ready, and Judy has flown into the construction yard to meet Steve and Martin for the first time. Now they'll have to deal with the human element of this project.
Feels like it wants to fly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In this breeze that's blowing up now, you can feel the strain on it. Hear it actually, it's creaking.
Oh!
Wow!
Oh!
Wowee!
That's very close now. We just need the hill to go with it, so they can follow it down it. If I throw the model too hard at the wrong angle, this then becomes a concave section. So,
and that's when it.
So you have to have the right angle of attack.
If you overdo it,
then bang, it will go very quick.
Right.
It will go extremely fast.
Right. The things that disturb me are when the nose comes up and it stalls, it just automatically seems to nose dive, which the thought of that is a bit uncomfortable to me, obviously.
I think the trouble we've got is actually trying to find where to actually hang you, so you have got that control the first time up.
I mean, the old hang glide had very tiny A-frames, very small.
It's all well and good to say use an A-frame, but we haven't got any evidence of an A-frame, but...
What have we got evidence of?
Very little.
Absolutely nothing.
No, we've got very little,
Right.
but there is good evidence of a harness being attached here, but this is the point you would like to be hung from.
I mean, I'm not bothered about harness comfort, but if I'm to commit my neck underneath it, I'd like some control.
As a modern hang glider?
The only form that I know is weight shift.
If we hang just an A-frame straight onto this now, and people are going to say that you've just built a hang glider. Up until now, we've built a Leonardo.
I need control. That's fundamental to me. Because if I haven't got control...
If you don't have control, then you're going to hurt someone
I'm not saying we're
badly.
to have control. I'm just saying to go to a modern hang glider concept is probably premature.
So what are you going to put on there?
I don't honestly know.
Judy refuses to fly without the same form of control she has on a modern glider. But Steve and Martin are determined not to compromise the authenticity of the design. Unless a solution can be found in Leonardo's own work, Judy and the glider will remain earthbound. In 1482, Leonardo left Florence and moved to Milan to further his ambitions. Aged 30, he went to work for Ludovico Sforza, a powerful duke who was attracting to his court the most talented artist engineers and thinkers of the time.
Lots of scholars were moving to Milan, and Leonardo will find, for instance, a fantastic companion in Milan, Luca Pacioli. Luca Pacioli was a great mathematician and introduced Leonardo to Euclid. Leonardo didn't know anything about geometry when he moved to Milan, and Luca Pacioli and other scholars, Marcantonio della Torre for anatomy, Giorgio Valla for the classic knowledge, were very important for him during his Milan stay.
Milan, Leonardo began to study, began to write, began to change his idea of the artist, and more and more he was involved in theoretical discussions, for example.
This was an important change for Leonardo. Previously, artists, particularly painters, had been excluded from the realms of philosophy. Indeed, they were regarded as mere labourers. Leonardo would be the first to break through this mould and elevate the role of artist.
He went immediately to the center of the problem, which is the causes, which is the reasons of the life, le ragioni della vita, che cosa è anima e che cosa è moto.
The causes of life and death would preoccupy Leonardo for the rest of his life. He was one of the first to investigate physical, mechanical causes, not just spiritual ones. He regarded God as the ultimate mechanic, the designer and builder of the finest machine on earth, man.
O investigator of this machine of ours, let it not distress you that you gain knowledge from another's death, but rejoice that our Creator has given us intellect so that we may understand it.
He'd gone from using man as a source of inspiration for his machines to actually seeing man as a machine. This was a controversial view in Renaissance Italy.
I think that Leonardo was put in a dangerous position by his voracious interest in the structure of the human body and in all that this implied for the workings of nature. So I think the notion that the body has an autonomous functioning system, that it is independent of divine action, that was dangerous.
The Church controlled the institutions permitted to practice anatomy. Leonardo dissected corpses in secret.
Leonardo worked privately, outside of any institution, to dissect. There would have been no chemicals to preserve the body, and he talks in his notes about his horror of the night hours spent in the company of these corpses. He also tells us about how he was obstructed by blood so that he couldn't really tell the difference between different materials that he was looking at inside the body. And he was having a problem with connective tissue, which he describes as membranes, and there being membranes everywhere. And so it was quite hard for Leonardo to develop his knowledge of anatomy from the body. I mean, what he came up with was really remarkable, miraculous in many ways.
But what he came up with was also unorthodox. He believed that scientific observation, not religious dogma, should dictate how the world was interpreted. Leonardo had taken a dangerous path. His studies led him to a startling conclusion, that God's divine creation, man, was a machine, and like all machines, capable of improvement.
One, two, three, go!
The crossbow team have finally ironed out their problems and have started to assemble the bow. Before they put the modified bow limbs in place, they need to test them to see how they stand up under pressure. It's in the building of these limbs that the team has strayed from Leonardo's original design. These are the muscles and tendons of the machine, the most critical components of all.
Tell me when we got to where we got to before.
Hang on just a second, let me mark it.
This is the make or break moment for the laminates that have taken over a month to prepare.
Well, you're halfway on the silver mark.
A little bit more. Whoa, 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 whoa. Something went there.
It's nothing short of a disaster. Their so-called improvements to Leonardo's design have failed.
I think we've got this is opening up, this laminate. And I think some of these glue lines might be going. Worst thing possible has happened, and I just know that when we bend it, those cracks are going to get worse and the things are going to snap, which is why I keep having to make it thinner to get more flex out of it. But if we go too far, we're just going to end up with these flimsy wings hanging off the end of it, and it's not going to work either if we do that. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was a Yorkshireman, I'd probably be crying at this point, because it's really, really frustrating, because I know we could do this thing, I know we can make it, but it's just that we haven't got the skills. We've lost those skills that they had in those days to be able to build these damn things, and we just, you know, it's really frustrating because we're almost sort of in grasping distance and it's slipping out of our grasp because we can't build it as well as we need to make this thing work.
Things go from bad to worse when new wood arrives to repair the damaged bow limb.
Oh dear, look at the shape of the damn thing. I mean, that is outrageous. That's just such a pile of crap.
Are they taking the piss or what? I mean, that is just utterly
we can't use that.
Useless.
It's not looking terribly clever, is it?
It's rubbish.
What's plan C then, boss?
Plan C? Yeah. Plan E we're on now, I think, aren't we?
In 14 days' time, the crossbow must be ready to fire, and the wood to repair the bow limb has been badly machined. In fact, it's useless. And this was the last batch of hickory in the country.
Not quite going to plan.
Nah. It's Friday, it's 3 o'clock, and we've got to have it done tonight. We better get on with it.
Yeah.
Dave's plan E is to salvage what they can from the wood they have, until he comes up with plan F, whatever that is. But even some of Leonardo's best-laid plans came to grief.
He planned aqueducts or other kinds of canal projects. He planned buildings. He planned urban systems. He planned ways of casting that no one had ever seen before. Now, Leonardo pushed the boundaries of technologies, and there is both a joy and a curse to that.
In the 1490s, Leonardo was tackling two colossal projects. The first was a giant statue of a horse for the Duke of Milan. It was to be 24 feet high and required Leonardo to invent a completely new method of casting bronze. The second was the Last Supper, a massive fresco for which he devised a new technique for painting on plaster. But in 1499, catastrophe struck. The French army invaded Milan and ousted the Duke. They destroyed Leonardo's unfinished horse statue. His masterpiece, The Last Supper, began to deteriorate soon after Leonardo fled the city. As a military engineer, sculptor and painter, he tasted bitter disappointment. The men building the glider are eager to stay faithful to Leonardo's design. But they've failed to find a control frame in his drawings that will satisfy pilot Judy Layden. So they've enlisted the help of Leonardo expert Martin Kimm, who's spent a lifetime studying Leonardo's drawings. His expertise is now crucial to Steve and Martin. If he can't find them a Leonardo design for a pilot frame, the whole project is in jeopardy.
I think your major concern is safety, isn't it? And particularly...
The main problem that I think we've got is control. We must have some form of control if we're going to ask someone to actually fly it.
Where I would resist as keeper of the historical conscience is if you introduce a system which is based upon later aeronautics that he couldn't have handled.
Yeah. Well, we've hit some sort of wall
that's
with
a
an
good point.
A-frame as such, but
Yeah.
so what do you think we are allowed to do?
Well, if you think of this...
Martin guides them to a tiny drawing in the corner of a sketchbook.
The A-frame, so-called, is a reasonable extrapolation from that. So it's within the right territory, even if he didn't invent it. Right. So I'd be happier if this frame worked, but if it doesn't work, then we've got... It's not a wall, it's a kind of elastic boundary.
All right, so if the worst comes to the worst,
I'll tell you when you hit a wall.
By finding this tiny drawing, Martin Kemp has solved the team's problems. It shows that Leonardo understood the principles of modern hang gliding control. Shifting the pilot's weight alters the direction of the glider. As a Leonardo expert, he's delighted with their work so far.
This is the only time he does this. This is a single, just one-off design.
So that's been very, very encouraging.
It's absolutely terrific, because one of the things Leonardo is trying to do is to invent something like nature. Not to look literally like a bird, but to have the feeling of a natural design. And that does that absolutely terrifically. I think it's great. I mean, this, in a way, is the Mona Lisa of engineering. This is terrifically exciting. So we're in a sense doing... Yeah, we're doing the Mona Lisa of engineering. This is good.
I'm glad you're quite pleased so far. It's encouraging anyway. It's good for us.
It's a big day for the crossbow team. The crossbow is finally ready to leave its Wiltshire home. The British Army test their big guns on Salisbury Plain. It's the ideal place for the field trials of Leonardo's super gun. The pieces for this huge jigsaw puzzle are all coming together. It's all going smoothly, but there is one nagging worry. When repairing the bow limb, they had to make do with the damaged hickory, and they haven't had time to test it yet. Will it hold together?
It's the size of it that is just, it does take your breath away.
Well, I think they were, we've got the theory that they were hoping that you just wheeled it out, aimed it at the enemy and they all ran away.
If there was a sort of pile of pikemen coming at you and they saw this about
they might well think twice.
They would probably say, no, had enough of that. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, the fear factor.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is the day of reckoning. Paolo Galluzzi has arrived from Florence for the big moment.
Quite impressive from there.
Well, I'm very impressed. Fantastic. I mean, also the object, you imagine from the drawing, this is because there is a human figure in the drawing, the dimension, but this makes more impression. I'm very excited. I think we are going to have a kind of historical experiment repetition.
Look at the size of those things. It's taking wood to its absolute limits. I think it just shows the sort of ambition that Leonardo had.
For safety reasons, a motor has to do the job of drawing back the bow. No one is allowed within 40 yards of this monster, because when fully drawn, it could shatter, sending lethal splinters flying.
Okay, take the strain gently.
After 11 weeks of work, the team's greatest hopes, or worst fears, are about to be realized. Dave has a microphone attached to the bow, and he's listening for the sound he fears most of all: cracking wood.
Go.
There's huge relief when the crossbow works, but the distance is disappointing, only 25 yards. It looks like there's a problem with the rope.
What happened to the rope? Is it still tight?
It's just gone slack. But I suspect the problem we have is the string stretching, and it's quite heavy. And I think we could have dealt with the heaviness, but we can't deal with the stretching.
Okay. The team hope it's just teething problems, and they set about trying to fine-tune it. It's slightly better, but still not what they'd hoped for.
Bollocks. Yeah. What the hell stretch this time?
My patience.
These knots are loose.
And then, to cap it all, the weather turns ugly. Despite the downpour, the team persevere. Not only is the rope stretching, but there seems to be another problem. The sling is failing to release the ball cleanly when it reaches the end of the launch ramp. Reviewing their latest disaster, the team think they've found a solution.
Stop it.
Yeah. The ramp is actually looking good.
Yeah.
But we've got to then stop the pouch and the ropes.
Yeah, we've got to stop
to allow
them
the
before,
ball to be
exactly.
dispatched.
We've got to stop them before they clash into this and waste half of their energy on the boat itself.
They're going to try and solve their problems by changing the rope and by fixing 2 upright posts in front of the ramps so that the sling stops dead and flings the ball forward. But the rain and the failing light are threatening to stop play.
It's like some form of torture, this, isn't it? Fire!
Despite many attempts, the crossbow fails to fire the ball beyond 50 yards. It is disappointing.
Just look at it. It is a monster. It's a bloody monster, isn't it? And a flipping scary monster all the time. I've been shaking in my boots. I might not have been showing it, but I've been absolutely scared witless drawing that thing back. Because I know in my mind the forces are horrendous. They're massive forces. And getting those limbs back, you know, we thought those limbs are going to break halfway down. They didn't. The whole thing held together.
The team were convinced their improvements to Leonardo's crossbow would make it work better. They were wrong. But despite such disappointing results, they're determined not to be beaten.
I've been thinking about this sort of all night, really, and I think it's back to the drawing board on the bow limbs. But the drawing board has to be Leonardo, because we're getting too far away from Leonardo's design, I think. I'm just trying to sort of think back how we how we got to this point. And I think what's happened is we were too confident at the beginning, because we looked at Leonardo's drawing and said, nope, this won't work. We could build it a lot better than that. We went down that route and now we found we were wrong. We can't build it better, because it is just putting these... we've got too complicated again, too complicated, and we've been too much influenced by current engineering theory.
The last person to leave the site was the man who warned the team about tampering with Leonardo's design, Paolo Galluzzi.
We would always dream of having Leonardo himself to give a look to what we did and say, rubbish, I would have done much better. But we are to be prepared to follow the process until an end, as in an adventure, real adventure.
Find out more about Leonardo da Vinci and the remarkable machines he designed at pbs.org.
Next time, the crossbow team try a more faithful version of Leonardo's design. but they've only got 7 days to build it. And we'll find out if Leonardo could have beaten the record for manned flight by 400 years.
I just want to get out there and do it now. I just want to go and fly it.
Leonardo's Dream Machines is available on video cassette or DVD. To order, call PBS Home Video at 1-800-PLAY-PBS. This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Beings are design thinkers. Artistry, empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking, these kinds of abilities now are increasingly the abilities that matter most. I think really one of the scariest words of the 20th century. This word right up here. There's a premium on giving people something they didn't know they were missing. $20 million in the bank or no more than 10 years to live, would you still be doing what you're doing, and would you still be doing it the way you're doing it? You need to unlock this and be able to see through the right side of your brain. I got to teach you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure to be here with you on this program. As some of you know, in a former life, before I chose the very, very noble calling of writing business books, I worked in the equally noble calling of writing speeches for politicians. And because of that experience as a speechwriter, I have developed a very rigid view of what makes effective presentations. I have discovered over the years that good speeches, good presentations, no matter where you are, no matter what your topic is, no matter whether the audience is large or small, good presentations always have 3 key ingredients, 3 key elements to any good presentation, anywhere, anytime. They are brevity, levity, and repetition. Let me say that one more time. Brevity, levity, and repetition. So I'm going to try to be reasonably brief. We've got a lot of material to cover, so probably end up being somewhat brisk. I'll try not to be too severe and serious about it all. And that third promise, the repetition promise, I will honor, because I will repeat the important stuff over and over and over and over and over and over and over again until you want to scream. Now, here's what I want to do during our short time together. I want to cover a lot of different things. I want to tell you about the 4 key differences between the left hemisphere of your brain and the right hemisphere of your brain. I want to tell you about 3 forces that are putting a premium on these more right brain kind